Hello friends, welcome to the HFY Ode, where we bring you new science fiction stories, a new world, a new adventure. And yes, there is no robotic or AI voices here, only real human voices with real human touch. So let's start this journey, and please subscribe my channel if you like the stories and press the bell icon for the latest updates. Let's have a story. Okay.
When the galactic record keepers first wrote of humanity, they did not write much. I have read the original entry. I keep it still. It says, in the dry hand of a clerk who never met one of them, that humans were a species of moderate use and excessive feeling, tolerant of hardship, quick to build, quicker to mourn, a creature that buried its dead with songs and kept the names of the lost long after the bodies were gone. The clerk found this last detail worth noting only because it made them, in his words, inefficient. I am Imvesh of the Quiet Rose. Among my people, the Veshhari, I am an archivist, which means I tend the long memory of the galaxy so that those who come after us do not have to learn the same griefs twice. I should tell you, before I go further, what I am. The Veshhari feel, not as a poet feels in metaphor, but as a body feels heat. When you are near me and you are afraid, I taste your fear at the back of my throat. When you grieve, my hands ache. We evolved this way on a world where cooperation was the only thing that kept anything alive, and we have never found a way to switch it off. I tell you this because everything I am about to recount, I did not merely witness. I carried it. I carry it now. The clerk was not wrong that humans grieved loudly. He was wrong that this made them weak. But it would take the galaxy a long time and a great deal of horror to learn the difference, and I had a closer seat to that lesson than any living thing should ever have. When humanity was admitted to the galactic community, they were placed, as all new species are, somewhere near the bottom of every ledger that mattered. They had no great fleets. They had no ancient alliances. What they had was a corridor of broken worlds along the dark edge of settled space, a region we called the Hollow-Reach, where the refugees of 100 old wars drifted between dead stars looking for somewhere to be left alone. Humans had gone there because no one else wanted it, and they had done what humans do, which is the thing the clerk could not see the worth of. They had taken in the drifting. They had built homes out of wreckage and called the wreckage by kind names. By the time I was assigned to observe them, the Hollow-Reach was not empty anymore. It was full of small colonies, full of small lives, and a great many of those lives were children, because a people who take in refugees take in the future of refugees, and the future of any people is always, mostly, it's young. I want you to understand that no one hated them. That is the part the galaxy still cannot say aloud. There was no villain who looked at the Hollow-Reach and felt malice. What happened to humanity did not happen because anyone wished them ill. It happened because of a form, a correctly filed, properly stamped, entirely legal form. The Unu Collective filed it. The Unu are not a species the way you and I are species. They are a civilization shaped like an appetite. Long ago, on a world I have never seen, they solved the problem of scarcity by deciding that scarcity was a failure of accounting. Everything to the Unu is biomass. A forest is biomass that has not yet been processed. A herd is biomass with a delay built in. They do not kill in the way a predator kills, with hunger and heat. They harvest the way a tide comes in, without expression, on a schedule. The Unu Collective had a department for it. The department filed a permit. The permit requested authorization to conduct a renewable biomass collection in the Hollow-Reach corridor, citing low strategic value of the region and the presence of unregistered immature organisms suitable for low-impact yield. Unregistered immature organisms. I have spent a long life with words, and I have never hated a phrase the way I hate that one. It means children. It means it in a language built so that no one filing the form would ever have to feel that it meant children. The permit was approved. It was approved because it was correct. The Hollow-Reach was, on every map the Council kept, a region of low strategic value. The colonies there were unregistered because the people who flee wars do not stop to register. and the immature organisms were, in the only sense the UNU cared about, suitable. The council clerk who approved it did not know what he was approving. He saw a form that matched a template, and he did what the template told him to do, and somewhere in the hollow reach a generation began, without knowing it, to die. I was sent because the Veshhari are sent to places where the accounting and the feeling are about to disagree. I went, as I always go, expecting to file a report and carry a small grief home with me, the way an archivist learns to carry small griefs, the way a traveler learns to carry water. I did not yet know that this was not a small grief. I did not yet know that there are some weights you do not carry home. You carry them forever, and they become the shape of you. I arrived ahead of the UNU. I had time, before the harvest, to walk through one of the colonies. I will tell you about it because I think you should know what was there before I tell you what came for it. It was called Tamsin's Verge. It had been named. A human child explained to me very seriously, after a woman who had died making sure other people got onto a ship. The colony was poor in the way the hollow reach was always poor, and rich in the way I had not expected. There were gardens. The Veshhari notice gardens. It is what we are. Humans had hauled soil across dark space in sealed crates and grown things in it that had no purpose, except that someone had loved them on a world that no longer existed. There were schools. The young there did not yet know they were unregistered. They knew the names of the gardens and the names of the dead and the names of each other, and they were, in the unbearable way of the young of any species, entirely certain that the future was a place they were going to get to go. I felt them. That is the thing I cannot make you feel, and the thing I most need you to believe. I stood in Tamsin's Verge before the UNU came, and I felt 1,000 small certainties of being alive, and I did not yet know that I was the only one in the galaxy who would carry the memory of what that had felt like before. The UNU seed ships came during the evacuation. I should be precise because the precision is the horror. The humans of the Hollow Reach knew the UNU were coming. The permit was public. It had been filed correctly, which meant it had been published correctly, and a human somewhere had read it and understood, in the time it takes a heart to drop, exactly what suitable for low-impact yield meant. They had begun, immediately, to evacuate. They had begun with the young. Every species that has ever loved its children evacuates them first, and humans, the clerk had noted with faint contempt, loved their children loudly. But the Hollow Reach is vast, and human ships were few and old, and you cannot move a generation through dark space on wreckage and kind names as fast as a collective can move a harvest fleet that has been doing this, on schedule, since before my own species learned to write. The UNU did not arrive to a defended world. They arrived to a world in the middle of trying, desperately, lovingly, and far too slowly, to get its children out. They took the slow ones. I will not describe the harvest. I have it in the archive in full because it is my office to keep what happened so that no one can ever say it did not, and I have read it more times than a sane person should, and I will not put it in your mind the way it is in mine. I will tell you only the shape of it. The UNU did not roar. There was no battle. There was a procedure conducted by machines that felt nothing, on a population that felt everything, while the galaxy which had approved the form looked away because the form had been approved. Some races sent statements of regret. The statements were also correctly filed. And I will tell you what I felt, because that is the only witness I am able to give that no machine could. I felt a colony of human beings understand, all at once, that they could not save all of their children. I have felt many griefs. The Veshhari have a long catalogue of them, and I had thought, in my professional pride, that I had felt most of the kinds there were. I had not felt that one. There is no word for it in my language. There is no word for it in any language I keep, and I keep a great many, because the thing itself is the kind of thing languages are built specifically so that no one has to say. And then, when it was over, I felt the second thing. And the second thing is the reason I am telling you any of this at all. I expected rage. You would expect rage. Every species in my archive, when you take its young, produces rage, a hot and broadcasting thing loud, the way grief had always been loud in humans. I braced for it the way you brace for heat. It did not come. What came out of the human colonies of the Hollow Reach in the days after the harvest was silence, not the silence of the defeated. I know that silence. It has a texture, a kind of sinking, and this was not that. This was the silence of a room going very still because something in it has decided something. I had felt that silence exactly once before, long ago, in a single individual, in a private matter I will not recount. I had never felt it in a civilization. I felt it now in millions, all at once, all in the same direction. And for the first time in a long life of carrying other people's feelings, I was afraid of what I was carrying. I want to be honest about something here because the archive is no good if the archivist lies. In those days, I did not understand what I was feeling. I reported it. I wrote that the human response was anomalous, that it did not match the grief profiles in our catalog, that the council should consider the possibility that humans processed loss through some mechanism we had not documented. The council read my report the way the council reads reports. They noted it. They filed it. They moved on. The harvest had been legal. The matter, as far as the accounting was concerned, was closed. The matter was not closed. The matter had not even begun. And I, who am supposed to be the one who feels what others miss, had felt the beginning of it and not known its name. What humanity did next, the council found reassuring. I want you to sit with that because it is the heart of everything. The thing that should have terrified them, comforted them, because they read it through the only language they had, which was the language of the ledger, and in the language of the ledger it looked like surrender. Humans began to apologize. They apologized first to their own dead. This much my people could understand. We have rights of contrition toward those we could not save, and a Veshhari who heard a human funeral broadcast and felt the grief in it would have called it grief and gone home, and slept badly and called it understood. But the humans did not stop at their dead. They broadcast apologies to the council for the disruption their colony's deaths had caused to the orderly business of the corridor. They broadcast apologies, and this is the part that no archive before mine had ever had to record, to the UNU. They sent the UNU collective a formal communication regretting any inefficiency their evacuation had introduced into the harvest schedule and offering, in the interest of reducing further disruption, to discuss terms. I felt the council relax. I felt it across light years, the great soft exhale of a body of governments deciding that a problem had resolved itself. The humans were behaving correctly. They were filing forms. A species that files forms is a species that has accepted the ledger, and a species that has accepted the ledger can be managed. The member for the largest of the old council races said, in open session, that this was the maturity the galaxy had hoped to see from a young people, and that it was regrettable it had taken such a loss to produce it. I was in the chamber when he said it. I felt no fear in the room at all. I was the only one afraid, and I could not have told you why. And that is the failure I will carry longest, because I am the one who is supposed to feel what the room cannot, and I felt it, and I could not read it. And so I said nothing while a man called genocide a teachable loss, and the room agreed. The UNU, of course, did not understand the apologies either, but they understood them differently than the council did, and the difference is the entire war. The UNU have no contrition. It is not that they suppress it, they never grew it. To the UNU, an apology is a sound a thing makes when it is yielding. They received humanity's regret the way a tide receives a request, which is to say not at all, except as information about how far in it might come. They read the human apologies as a population presenting itself. They read the offer to discuss terms as a yield optimizing its own collection. And so the UNU collective did the thing that I believe, to this day, no one who built the collective ever imagined a circumstance in which it would be the wrong thing to do. They accelerated. The harvest permits multiplied. The seed ships came back to the Hollow Reach not as a fleet sent to a region, but as a process scaling to meet a yield that had announced itself as cooperative. And the humans, colony by colony, surrendered. They did. I want to be exact because the exactness is the trap, and you will not understand the trap unless you feel how completely it worked. Humans gave up the Hollow Reach. They withdrew from world after world. They begged the Unu, in formal, correctly filed language, to take territory instead, to take infrastructure, to take anything, anything at all in place of the young. The Unu did not take instead of. The Unu took in addition to, because the Unu do not have an instead of. The collective has only a total, and the total was rising, and a rising total is the only thing a collective has ever recognized as success. Through all of it, the apologies continued. To the dead, to the council, to the Unu. I felt them, and here is the thing I must tell you, the thing it took me far too long to feel correctly. Underneath the apology there was no submission. I had been reading the apology the way the council read it, the way the Unu read it, as the sound of a thing yielding. It was not. The grief in the human signal was real. I never doubted the grief. The grief was the truest thing I have ever carried. But beneath the grief, growing, quiet, structured, was the thing I had felt in the silence after the first harvest, and now I could feel it taking a shape, and the shape had no name in my language because my language was built by a people who feel everything. And this was the feeling of a people who had felt everything and then decided, very calmly, what to do about it. I tried in those days to warn the council. I went to the chamber and I said that the human signal contained something the catalog did not have a word for, and that the absence of a word was itself the warning. The member for the old race asked me, not unkindly, whether the Veshari were perhaps overreading, given our nature, given how much we feel, whether what I was sensing was simply the largeness of human grief, which everyone knew was loud. I had no answer. That is the truth. I had a certainty and no word for it. And a certainty without a word is not admissible in a chamber that runs on forms. I went home, and I did not sleep, and I waited, because there was nothing else an archivist can do, for the thing I could feel and could not name to acquire a name by happening. It acquired a name. Her name was Mara Okonkwo. She came to the council as humanity's envoy to propose what the formal communication called a reconciliation. I felt her before she spoke. This is my office and my curse, and I will report it honestly. When a being enters a room, I feel what they are carrying, the way you feel the temperature of a place before you have looked at anything in it. Every envoy I had ever felt enter that chamber carried some mixture of fear and hope, and the particular thin exhaustion of a person who has been sent to ask powerful strangers for mercy. I braced for that mixture. I had felt it 1,000 times. It is, in its way, a tender thing to carry, and I had carried worse. Mara Okonkwo entered the chamber and I felt nothing of the kind. I felt grief, yes. The grief was there, the grief was always there in the humans. The grief was the floor she stood on. But on top of the grief there was no fear, and there was no hope, and there was no asking. There was a thing so still and so finished that for one long moment I could not breathe. And the member for the old race, who felt nothing, smiled at her and welcomed her warmly. And I sat there with her stillness in my chest like a stone gone cold, and I understood, finally, far too late to be of any use to anyone, what I had been feeling since the first harvest. It was not grief and it was not rage. It was a decision. The humans had made a decision, and they had spent every apology since the Hollow Reach buying the time and the cover to put it in place. And now, the woman who would deliver it was standing in the chamber being thanked for her maturity. She proposed terms. She proposed them gently. I felt the gentleness, and it was the most frightening thing I have ever felt, because it was real, she meant it, and it sat on top of the decision like a clean cloth laid over an instrument. She offered the Unu collective a final corridor. She offered formal acknowledgement of the collective's right, under galactic law, to conduct biomass collection. An acknowledgement the Unu had never required because they had never doubted it, and the offering of it was so complete a surrender that the council visibly warmed. She requested only that the harvest be conducted in a single consolidated operation, at coordinates humanity would provide, so that the affected population could be gathered with what she called dignity, and so that the disruption to the corridor, that word again, the corridor, would be final. One operation, one place, one time. An end to the matter. The UNU collective accepted. They accepted because it was efficient. A consolidated harvest at fixed coordinates is the optimal harvest. Every department in the collective that had ever filed a form would have signed that one. The UNU did the thing that a collective does when a yield offers to gather itself for collection. They gathered too. Every seed ship, every harvest engine, every processor, every vault, the entire industrial body with which the UNU collective did the only thing the UNU collective did, moved to the coordinates humanity had named, because that is where the yield would be, and a collective goes where the yield is. It does not occur to a tide to wonder why the sea has offered to come to one beach. I felt the council exhale again, deeper this time, the exhale of a problem not merely managed but concluded. I felt the member for the old race speak of closure, and I felt in the human signal in the days before the appointed time, the thing that finally told me how completely I had failed to read what I had been carrying. The grief did not rise. In every species in my archive, in the hours before the loss of its young, grief rises. It becomes a roar. It is the loudest thing a people ever does. I waited for the human grief to rise, because the human grief had been the truest thing in this whole horror, and surely now, at the end, it would crest. It did not rise. It went quiet, not gone. Humans do not lose their grief. I have never known a species that holds it longer. It went quiet the way a hand goes quiet on the way to doing the thing it has decided to do. And in the space where the rising grief should have been, I felt the decision come fully forward, unhidden now, no longer beneath anything, and I sat alone in the quiet rose with the whole shape of it in my chest at last, and I was more afraid than I have been before or since, and there was no one I could make understand, because the only word for what I was feeling was the thing that was about to happen. At the appointed second, the human fleet was already there. I need you to understand that the UNU were not ambushed in the way the word usually means. They were not surprised that humans were present. Humans had said they would be present. The entire reconciliation was built on humanity being present to be collected. The UNU collective arrived at the coordinates expecting a gathered yield and a cooperative population, and there was a human fleet, exactly as agreed. And for one moment, the last moment in which the old galaxy still existed, everything was proceeding according to the form. Then the human fleet did not fire on the UNU. I have had to explain this many times, and I have watched, every time, the listener wait for the part where the humans destroy the UNU, because that is the shape these stories have always had in every archive that came before mine. That is not what happened. The human fleet did not target a single UNU life. Not one. They had spent months and a generation of their own dead arranging for the entire industrial body of the collective to be in one place, and when it was, they did not kill the UNU. They killed the harvest. In a window of time so short that the Council's instruments recorded it as a single event, the human fleet destroyed every harvest engine, every seed ship, every processor, every biomass vault, every consolidated piece of the apparatus with which the UNU collective had, on schedule and without malice, done the thing it did to the children of the Hollow Reach. They did it with a precision I do not have the language to convey, and I keep the entire language of the galaxy. They did it surgically, deliberately, with what the records show to be a restraint that must have been harder than slaughter, because slaughter is a thing you do when you have lost control, and this was the opposite of that. This was control made total, and they left the UNU themselves alive. Alive, stranded, whole, and forever incapable of ever harvesting anything again. The UNU collective, in the space of that single recorded event, ceased to be the thing it was, not because it was killed, because the thing it was had been only the appetite and the apparatus of the appetite, and the apparatus was gone, all of it everywhere at once, and the appetite remained with nothing left to express itself through, in a fleet of suddenly purposeless ships full of beings who had never once, in the entire history of their civilization, had to ask what they were if they were not collecting. There was no roar from the humans even then. I felt for it. After everything, I think part of me wanted it, wanted the clean, hot grief into rage that my archive understood because I knew how to carry that. It did not come. What I felt from the human fleet at the moment the harvest of the Unu ended forever was the grief, still there, never gone, and over it settling something I can only call completion. Not triumph. I have felt triumph. It is bright and it broadcasts. This did not broadcast. It was the feeling of a hand that has finished doing the thing it decided to do, lowering. And then Mara Okonkwo spoke to the Unu, and to the council, and to all of us, and I felt every word before I heard it. And I am going to tell you what she said because it is the center of the archive, and I have built everything else around it. She did not gloat. The council expected gloating. Gloating is what the ledger predicts from a victor, and the council only ever predicted from the ledger. She spoke gently, the same real gentleness I had felt enter the chamber, and she said that the Unu had been spared deliberately, and that humanity wanted the collective to understand why, because understanding was the entire point and killing them would have prevented it. She said that humans had considered destroying the Unu and had chosen not to, and that the choosing had been the hardest thing her people had ever done, harder than the hollow reach, harder than the apologies, and that they had done it on purpose so that the Unu would have to live, all of them, every department and every drone and every being who had ever filed the form, in the full and permanent knowledge of what had been taken from them, and the equally full knowledge that the people who took it had been able, easily, at no cost to end them, and had instead let them live. She said, "We are letting you keep your children." She said it gently. I felt the gentleness, and the gentleness is the thing that broke me, because it was not a weapon pretending to be mercy. It was mercy. It was the real thing, chosen at enormous cost, and aimed with the precision of a fleet that had just proven it could aim anything. And it was the cruelest thing I have ever felt one civilization do to another. And it was kind, both at once, fully. And there is no word for that in my language either, and I have stopped looking for one. The Unu did not answer. The Unu had no procedure for being shown mercy by something they had treated as biomass. I felt them after in the stranded, purposeless ships, and what I felt was not grief, because they had never grown grief. But it was the place where grief would have been, an enormous shaped absence, the exact size of everything they had taken and never felt. And humanity had built it in them deliberately, and left them alive to live inside it, on purpose, as the lesson, because they had decided that the lesson mattered more than the vengeance and were strong enough to choose the harder of the two. The council declared in the days after that what humanity had done was a violation. They were correct by the ledger. No permit had authorized it. No form matched the template. The member for the old race demanded sanction and got, instead, the first crack in the thing he stood in, because 4 of the old council races refused. They refused, and when they were asked to justify the refusal, the eldest of them, a species older than my own, said only that they had read the harvest permit when it was filed, that they had had the power to halt it and had not, because halting it would have been a disruption to the corridor, and that they would not now sit in judgment of the only species that had refused to find the children acceptable. They withdrew from the council. Others followed. The body that had run the galaxy on the language of the ledger discovered, for the first time in its long history, that there were things its language could not file, and that a sufficient number of its members had learned, too late and at someone else's unbearable cost, to be ashamed. I have one more thing to record, and then the archive of the Hollow Reach is complete and I can set it down, though I will never, in the way you mean the word, put it down. It has been a long time since the appointed second. I am old now even by the long count of my people. I keep the quiet rows still. An archivist does not retire. An archivist simply accumulates until the accumulation is the archivist. I sit most days in the gardens because the Veshhari notice gardens, and because there are gardens again in the hollow reach, grown from soil hauled across dark space in sealed crates by a people who buried their dead with songs and kept the names of the lost and turned out. The clerk could not have known to be the most dangerous thing in the galaxy precisely because of it. There is a companion who sits with me some days in the gardens. It is an Unu, not a metaphor, an actual Unu, one of the stranded, one of the ones humanity left alive inside the absence on purpose. It came to the Veshhari after the way nothing in the collective had ever come to anyone, because the collective had never needed to come to anyone, and it asked us, in the flat language of a thing that had no other language yet, to teach it the thing it had felt for the first time in the stranded ships and had no procedure for. It used the word it had been given. It asked us to teach it grief. We are slow teachers, and it is a slow student, and it is, I think, the most important work I have ever done, more important than the entire archive, because the archive only remembers and this learns. It feels things now. Small things badly, the way you or I would feel a language we learned in age. The other day it felt something it could not place and turned to me with the particular helplessness of a being encountering its own heart, and asked me what the feeling was. And I felt the feeling in it before I answered, the way I have felt everything in everyone my whole long life. And I will tell you what it was, because it is the running thread of this entire account, and I have saved it for the end on purpose. The way Mara Okonkwo saved the mercy for when it would mean the most. It was an apology. It had not done anything, in the small, slow life it now lived in the gardens, that required one. That is not what an apology is for. I had to explain, and explaining it to the thing that had taught the galaxy what humans were by not having it was the strangest hour of my life. An apology, I told it, is not always the sound a thing makes when it yields. Sometimes it is the sound a thing makes when it has understood. The humans had been apologizing the whole time. To their dead, to the council, to the Unu, in the days when the galaxy thought they were surrendering and I thought I could not read them and only the children who could not hear were owed it. They had not been yielding. They had been telling us in the only language gentle enough to carry it, exactly what they were, and not one of us, not the council with all its forms, not the Unu with all its appetite, not even me with everything I feel, had been willing to understand it until they made us.